Hey, new blog about the upcoming update, primarily focused on ogres, it looks like, at least going by this banner art. So, it seems to have been radio silence from Crave Assembly for a good bit. And I assume that there's quite a bit of backlash in the community about this, generally because what I understand, what I have known of the Total War community is that they generally don't handle these sorts of things well. But I actually don't really know. I've not been paying attention for the last couple months, because I've kind of just been taking this time between updates to enjoy other video games. So, perhaps there's some degree of community controversy to discuss, or perhaps Crave Assembly's let loose little bits of news down the past couple months. I don't know. I've been enjoying other games, and when the next update, the DLC comes out, I'll be playing it. And I don't know. There you go. But I'm excited to talk about this next update because, realistically speaking, I think Total War Warhammer 3 is in a very good state. I'm sure there are some people who would disagree. There are some people who have certain dreamlike, nostalgic ideas of Total War Warhammer 1 and Total War Warhammer 2 never having bad periods, which they certainly did. And honestly, I don't think Warhammer 3 in its current state is really all that different from Warhammer 2, other than the addition of more content and more quality of life changes. There are still a few more bugs, certainly, and they could still stand to optimize the campaign map. But broadly speaking, at Warhammer 3's launch, if someone said they're going back to Warhammer 2, I got it. I wasn't doing it. I was going to wait until Immortal Empires dropped. But if they said they weren't going to play Realm of Chaos, I absolutely understood that. I think now, if someone said they were going back to Warhammer 2 and weren't going to play Warhammer 3 anymore, I would think they're crazy. Unless they just have a burning hatred of Cathay and Kislev in their hearts, I would think they're crazy. So, Warhammer 3 has been in kind of a period for a bit with me now, where every time they release a new DLC, every time there's a big new update, I'm glad to see it, and it's generally very cool stuff, and I'm very happy with the quality of life updates we got with the last update between DLCs. But it's in a position where I'm not necessarily hankering at the bit for every new update, because I'm pretty happy with the place the game is in. Nonetheless, I suppose that has nothing to do with anything, so I should just move on to talk about the update, shouldn't I? This blog. Okay, so yes, patch 5.2 was wonderful. Yes, it has been. So, talk about the dev chats, feedback, and people asked for new characters between DLCs, which is not going to happen. That's just not how it's working. So, this may be me being cynical, but I would expect that when you ask the fans for feedback, they're generally going to respond with the impossible. That's part of why it's a job to be these market, like, what's the word for someone who's paid by a company to, like, look into the market and find what the fans want. There's a reason it's paid to do these things, because there is so much feedback when you ask for it that has to be filtered through, because they just ask for the impossible. That episode of Simpsons, right? You know, you want something that's exciting, but also subtle and in your face, and loud but quiet, fast but slow, and also you should win prizes and get paid to play it. And yeah, there has to be someone filtering through these things, these market researchers. And nonetheless, there you go. That's just part of what's going on there. But game balance, topic is multifaceted, Lord knows. Because in the past, when Crave Assembly has tried to take a swing at game balance, people have been very unhappy with it. Because they have generally hit units that people thought were in... I think a lot of players, when they ask for better game balance, they are referring to single-player campaign play. And Crave Assembly generally is under the mentality that the best way to balance units is by going off of multiplayer battles, which is a very small segment of the community. I have not been that opposed to multiplayer battles based ballots for units. I think it's a somewhat fair metric to base them on. But I also play on normal difficulty in campaign. There are a lot of people that play on hard, very hard, or legendary, and they consider any difficulty below those three, below very hard usually, to be baby mode and not very interesting. And more power to them, it's just not the way I play the game. I don't doom stack. I incorporate mods that discourage doom stacking. I don't like when the AI gets particularly big advantages. I just don't think I'm very good at the game in that sense, especially because at the high level of campaign play in Total War, it gets to be very exploit-based, and the exploits just don't interest me because Total War generally interests me as a immersive experience, I suppose I should say. But if they're going to be handling more campaign balance, which it looks like they're saying they're going to be changing the control, they're looking into the control and corruption systems, fair enough. I don't think there will be much controversy there. And they can't share just yet what the plans are with those features. But the complexity is larger than one would think. That's another thing. Wiser minds than myself have said that the player base can ascertain when there is a problem, but they aren't very good at figuring out the fix. That generally speaking, players, when asked for the fix to a given problem, are going to be very clumsy, handle it in a very sledgehammer sort of way, or they're going to misinterpret it in favor of the playstyle they have, but against other playstyles. But they can generally figure out when there is a problem. But anyways, control's too easy a system to manage. I think there's definitely an argument in favor of that. I would also say that generally speaking, control is kind of irrelevant as systems go. Back in the days of Warhammer 2, and this would be before the last couple updates of Warhammer 2, but back in the days of Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 1, public order was a system that it was supposed to be that if you didn't manage it properly, you got punished by the spawning of AI armies, there would be a problem. The first issue with this was exploits. That it became the safe, easy way to play on higher difficulties was to deliberately raid your own territory, cause a rebellion, and kill the rebellion for easy XP. And it was a really goofy exploit that didn't make any sense for anyone like other than greenskins, which for greenskins that actually would be a pretty loreful way of playing the game. The other issue with it was that it was really more annoying than interesting. I think if we discuss control now as a mechanic, it's better that it do what it does kind of for the high elves, where it doesn't just influence your growth, which is pretty well the only thing it touches now that I can recall, but that it also influences your economy, and that if you let your public order get out of control, your economy is going to take a hit. I'd also definitely be of the opinion that that you should have more ways to harm the public order of enemy settlements, and conversely that the AI should have more ways to hurt your public order, perhaps as alternative ways from just directly attacking your city. Give the AI multiple ways that they can harm your territory other than just directly sieging your city. That'd be interesting to have to deal with different varying threats from the AI over the course of a campaign. But that sounds kind of advanced. That's kind of, I don't know how much someone could realistically implement these sorts of things in just one update. But yeah, let's see. How each race needs to be considered and how they interact with the public order system. That is a big point, because high elves, I just said, they have a special interaction with public order because it affects their economy, and no one else for some odd reason. And of course, it is interconnected with corruption. For Skaven, it's also a big thing because their corruption is really weird. So they're going to be thorough and take a deep look. Okay, wait, hang on. This quote. Their long-standing Total War features, and I think they suffer from a legacy of being carried from game to game without a real deep dive into what their place in the game actually entails. That's kind of an odd insult from whoever wrote this dev blog against the rest of the team. I'm shocked to see that. But they're more or less saying, yeah, we kind of just took this system from the historical Total Wars without thinking about it too much. in some cases. I mean, I respect admitting that you've got a flaw, but nonetheless, that's surprising to see. I think we've all felt that with several of the races. There are sometimes Republic Order feels like a mechanic that you do interact with that is a deliberate part of the game, but there's a lot of times Republic Order as a mechanic just kind of feels like something that's there because it'd be weird if it wasn't. Gotta get your H2O. Interesting to see them acknowledge that. Ancillary rebalance, mentioned in the previous dev video. Intended to be part of patch 5.3, but now it won't be. Understandably, that is a lot of stuff. Because there is out there somewhere, I forget what the name of the website is, but there's a website that lists all the ancillaries in Total War Warhammer. And it is bonkers. And with each new race they've added to the game, it's generally got more reasonable. Where it's a list of, like, I don't know, 20 ancillaries. Pretty easy to keep track of. But when you go back to Warhammer 1 launch, the Empire, the Dwarfs, the Greenskins, the Vampire Counts had comical, absurd numbers of ancillaries. They were impossible to track. And so many of them just do the same thing, except that one ancillary will just be more mild in its effects than the other. And speaking of mild effects, that's another big thing, is that for the 50 ancillaries that the Empire gets, all of them are pretty well garbage compared to any of the ancillaries that a Warhammer 2 race or Warhammer 3 race gets. Generally speaking, they've made a lot of campaign updates over the last near decade that have brought the Warhammer 1 races up to snuff with the Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 races campaign-wise in a lot of departments, but ancillaries is one thing that the Warhammer 1 races are still very much behind on. Which is not a big deal, because ancillaries are kind of just a cutesy mechanic for a little bit of character customization that ultimately doesn't matter. But it is something that sticks out when you really notice it. But, yeah, it won't be as part of this next patch. So, in the interest of maintaining transparency, I appreciate them maintaining transparency. That will generally get them. You will generally suffer for being transparent, but I respect them for doing it. And, yep, as part of game development, some things go slower, some things go faster. There will be more writing about the ancillary system. Yeah, it's not up to snuff yet. Okay. Okay, here we go. Patch 5.3. Changes and additions to 2 core Ogre Kingdoms features. Ogre Kingdoms are in the next Lord pack. One of the Lords will be Golgfuk Maneater. So, they're going to be getting hit real good. So they're going to be making new interesting ancillaries for ogres. Okay, are they going to tie in the ancillary update really with this next DLC to try and specifically focus on making more interesting ancillaries that tie into mechanics specifically for these 3 races? That would be interesting. Okay, the way the mercenary system works for ogres in Warhammer 3 as opposed to Warhammer 2 came with certain improvements. However, it also missed the mark in a number of ways, and we saw a lot of feedback asking for certain aspects of how it worked in Warhammer 2 to return. But with the additional user experience improvements Warhammer 3 brought. Because in Warhammer 2, it was that an ogre camp would appear in your territory semi-randomly. I forget if it was like after big battles. I think it might have been after big battles, but it might have also been random. I don't remember. And the ogre camp would pop up, and it would allow you to recruit from ogre bulls with single weapons, ogre bulls with dual weapons, which I don't think they were even called bulls yet. They were just ogres. Man-eaters with great weapons. Man-eaters with pistols, I think. And Mournfangs. And it looks like here, increased the ogre mercenary unit cap per army to 3 from 1. I'm sorry, what? The mercenary cap used to be 1 unit? You're joking? I've never interacted with this mechanic, so that's a shock. If I have interacted with this mechanic in the past, I'm for certain that I would have used a mod to increase that cap to 20. Because I have tabletop caps mod on, so that's going to be inherent limiter. Ogre mercenary pools now replenish at a rate of 1 unit every 5 turns. Quality of mercenary units available now depends on the tier of the ogre camp, and more mercenary units are now available from ogre camps. So bulls dual weapons, man-ears with ogre pistols, Mournfang cavalry, and an ogre giant. Okay, so I assume that moves in the tiers, right? Tier 1 camp gives ogre bulls, Tier 2 camp gives dual weapon bulls, Tier 3 gives man-eaters, and so on. The only issue I see with that is that while it makes sense that the camp would give better units the stronger it gets, the issue is that this does, for the player, assuming that the player is not playing ogres, and they have let a friendly ogre faction build a camp in their territory so that they get access to mercenaries. The issue I foresee there is that you're relying on the AI other player, the AI playing the ogres, to upgrade the camp for you. And the AI is not really good at building where it helps the player. The AI in general has, like, historically had issues where it's, like, overly conservative with its budget and issues like that. So I do wonder if this is going to be a problem or not. So that'll be interesting to see. Other than that, the other... Well, I was about to say the other problem I see with that, but I'm not... I've forgotten it, so... My brain is working at maximum capacity today. I do think it's neat that you can get a giant as a mercenary. Very few people will, because it's generally common opinion that the giant is a crap unit, but I like giants. And I think it makes sense to recruit a giant as a mercenary. Because in the lore, like, in Total War Warhammer, the giants only really work with the barbarian races. But in the lore, by all means, the giants could hypothetically work with anyone, as long as they'd have them. So I appreciate them being added to the mercenary system. I was kind of figuring that when Dogs of War came around, giants would be part of that as well. So makes sense. It's about equivalent. Okay, bounties. Now here's one that's actually interesting, because the mercenaries mechanic is not something that when you're playing as ogres, it doesn't factor in. It's a mechanic for the other races to interact with when ogres are on the board. But when you're playing ogres, it's a non-mechanic. However, bounties, that is a big one. So bounties, my memory is that they start off really I don't remember, I almost want to say I could remember them getting better as the game goes on. But they never really give out that much money. The greater value of the bounty system was the diplomatic relations bonuses. But also, the big issue with the bounty system was that it would encourage you to travel halfway across the world and encourage you to declare war on factions you're at peace with. And for Creative Assembly's philosophy for Total War, Creative Assembly generally, it seems to me, based off the way they handle difficulty and the way they've handled balance in a lot of cases, is, for one thing, they're of the mentality, it's Total War, not total diplomacy. They generally have the mentality that the player should be at war with as many factions as possible, that have as many armies as possible, while the player has as few armies as possible. So that the player is constantly having these heroic, badly outnumbered moments as many turns as possible in the campaign. Which is not my style. Generally, I tend to play... I don't consider myself to play conservatively or boring in a boring way. But that's generally not the way I play. I mentioned earlier I set it to normal difficulty. Did I mention that in this recording? I might have actually mentioned that in the cut recording. But either which way, I play on normal difficulty. I play with a few mods that limit both the player and the AI's ability to engage in certain exploits. So when the Ogre Bounties mechanic pops up and says, okay, yes, you're in an all-out war right now with the Chaos Dwarfs, with Tsar Nagrund, but what if you also declare war on Grimgore for 200 gold? I'm just not going to take that bounty, because that's suicidal, or if it's not suicidal, well, for me it's suicidal. I'm not good enough to pull that off. But it's just a pain in the ass for a very small reward. So, I assume they're not going to change the bounty system, trying to encourage you to go to war with as many people as possible. It's just part of how Crev Assembly generally their philosophy. But I assume the rewards are going up. At least going off. I've not been looking at this text here because I'll talk about it when I get there. Excuse me. Sorry about that. But going off this picture already, that's, 1,500 gold or 1,600 gold is better than like 300 gold you're being offered for bounties before. And plus 40 diplomatic relations is pretty crazy. Camp growth for all camps could also be pretty crazy. Okay, taking the theme of mercenary contracts and doing much more with it in the DLC. Rename the existing contracts feature to bounties. Okay. So, I wonder if they're renaming it. Crev Assembly takes the naming conventions pretty seriously. When Chaos Dwarfs came out, of course, everybody mocked the DLC for the fact that the slaves were referred to as labor. And Crev Assembly said that while it was kind of goofy, they intentionally kept the mechanic named as labor instead of slavery because the Dark Elves already had a mechanic that was called slavery. And Crev Assembly wanted to keep the names of the mechanics separate. This, to me, there's a good chance that bounties are renamed to, our mercenary contracts are renamed to bounties for Greasus and for Scrag, so that now the probably enhanced version of the system, almost certainly enhanced version of the system that Goldfug gets, will be referred to as mercenary contracts now. Either that or mercenary contracts will now be the name of the mechanic for the Dogs of War when they come. So, this strikes me as one of those systems where they just made a name change so that that mechanic name could be used for someone else's mechanic, whether it's Goldfug or Dogs of War. New, more thematic UI, yeah, moving away from Warhammer 3s, vanilla Warhammer 3, launch Warhammer 3s, general handling of the UI of just reusing the same UI elements over and over because Warhammer 3 was more than a little bit rushed. The 10-turn generation is now a rolling objective bounty system. Previously only available every 10 turns. It wasn't very interactive. So the bounties are now more of an interest more consistently. Well, it says here that the bounty over on the right expires in 22 turns. That's quite a long time. So if I didn't want any of the bounties at the board, am I going to have to wait 20 or 30 turns to get bounties that I do want? Because I'm not seeing a reject bounty button here. I'm also not seeing an accept bounty button either, which makes me think that now bounties are just dynamically, if you happen to kill Helman Gorst as Clan Treatrick wants, or Shengye as the Western Provinces want, then you're just going to get the bounty reward even though you didn't per se accept it ahead of time. Yep, the text then says that. All objectives are now available continually instead of only being able to select a single one. Gameplay for bounties is now more opportunistic in nature, and you don't have to accept a single mission, but can instead tackle any and all bounties at your leisure. That's very cool. I like that. And I do appreciate that you can now do bounties on accident. That's quite nice. That makes me wonder if they might do that for the alliance missions, the ally missions, when you take quests from your allies in exchange for more alliance points. That could be interesting. At the same time, I think that would lead to players building up loads and loads of alliance points. Ancillary system rebalance and new items. They wanted to release the first cycle of rebalanced ancillaries alongside a selection of brand new ancillaries to round out the item pools. The goal was sustainable practices. Sustainable is important. There's certainly been times where they went nuts with an update and it wasn't really sustainable. They couldn't add it for more other races, what they've done for one race, and it led to differing expectations among the fan base. Built around a power budgeting matrix, where an item's budget is derived from how rare it is. The item's value should be consonant with its rarity. There are now rarity brackets based on how rare an ancillary is, because some ancillaries are certainly easier to get than others. Of course, it's not so much a thing now. They did fix this exploit, but for the longest time until Warhammer's lifetime, the exploit to get students for more research speed. Students were very common, and they were very good. All you had to do was win a battle without your faction researching anything from the research tree, and you'd get a student. And they provided a whole 10% research speed. So if you just kept doing that, you could get so many students on so many of your characters. It was absurd. And they're adjusting the effects. They're bringing in some of the new effects that the game has had, such as barrier. So would like the Empire be able to get an ancillary that provides barrier to the Lord that it's equipped on? The balance was not up to snuff. The difference between high value common and a low value uncommon would be far too slim. It's weird they're providing the lowdown on what was wrong with the balance for the update that didn't release for us. I appreciate the transparency, but it's rare to see a game dev just out and out say, so here's what's wrong with the balance for this feature right now and why we're delaying it till later. I appreciate it, but that is different. And okay, there were some items that were considered iconic that they nerfed too hard, so they're going to try and undo that. Okay, interesting. Patch 5.3 will still contain 18 new generic ancillaries, which drop only for relevant factions. To help you outfit your gun toters, bowslingers, and blowpipe blasters with improvements to their ranged performance. Okay, so for more ranged weapons, interesting. And they're introducing the concept of randomly dropped unique ancillaries, which are extra rare and come with particularly zesty effects. Okay, hang on, this is... Okay, plus 50% campaign movement range, 20% chance to appear in a random nearby region upon ending turn. That's pretty bonkers. It's not too hard. I will say, sadly, I don't see that I'm necessarily seeing too much use, other from people like me who are just looking to have goofy fun. Because it's really pretty easy to hit the campaign movement range cap. It really only takes a couple levels and the right skills and the right heroes in your army, and you'll have capped out the campaign movement range of an army. So, while 50% campaign movement range is a crazy buff, if you don't have those skills and those heroes, it doesn't provide anything that the right players won't know how to do without using that item slot, and also without risking the chance that they just go somewhere that they don't intend to. But I do like this direction of these items that do funny stuff alongside big buffs. I think that's quite cool, and it's very Warhammer, right? I generally am inclined to the idea that it's the right choice that Skaven artillery doesn't just randomly explode, right? I appreciate that Total War Warhammer tries to make units behave more consistently and not just kill themselves like they did on Tabletop. Because on Tabletop, it was a crapshoot with a lot of units, intentionally so, that you'd roll the dice, and there were a lot of units in the Tabletop that could just kill themselves if you rolled the dice wrong. Any demon could, hypothetically, any turn, just evaporate and disappear. Any Skaven artillery unit, or really any artillery unit in the game, but especially Skaven artillery, could just blow itself up at the drop of a hat. And that's fine on Tabletop where you're playing against friends, and if something stupid happens and your entire army kills itself in a single turn, then you just laugh and now you have a story to tell. But in a video game, especially a video game where you are going to be having dozens, if not hundreds of battles over the course of a campaign, the possibility for any of the units that you have bought to kill themselves at any point is kind of just bad player experience. So I agree with Crib Assembly not making that the way units behave by default, but I also appreciate when Crib Assembly adds items and adds optional unit abilities that allow you to do goofy things with goofy drawbacks. I do appreciate that balanced philosophy. It's very, very Warhammer. Also, I have to mention here, in this picture, they have the Helm of Dreska, or Draeska? I don't know, as the armor. And that is neat to see, because that is a little bit of an obscure item from the lore. I can't remember just how obscure. Actually, I could be super wrong. It might be fairly well known. But either which way, the Helm of Draeska is pretty neat going off memory, because if memory serves, it's from the... It's an old artifact of the Bretonni, the ancestors of the Bretonnians, who are not super well known in lore. There's not a super huge amount of information about them. Most of the information we have about them comes from the old Heinrich Himmler unique army list from White Dwarf. And speaking of that, very coolly, the mod that Kataf and Vandy made in... does he still go by Vandy? I think he goes by a different name now. But that mod back in Warhammer 2, there was a mod back in Warhammer 2 by Kataf and Vandy, or the modder formerly known as Vandy, that added the White Dwarf unique army list for Heinrich Himmler. And one of the lords that Himmler could recruit was a undead being possessed by the Helm of Dreska. And that was very cool. So I'm glad to see that odd little bit of lore get a reference and it be present here. And they're continuing to remove tree acne. Made changes to an additional 46 battle maps. Okay. Battle balance update. Well, that's casting a wide net. So they're shifting the multiplayer meta slightly by introducing some small and not so small changes to just about every faction in the game. The tweaks aim to correct outlying units in various rosters and bring them back in line with both what we and the community expect to see. Aim is to keep the experience feeling fresh by shifting the faction meta around slightly. And it's coming from a community-sourced balance thread. Oh, excuse me, it's not coming from there. They're not just putting in fan balance. But it is, they give a shout out to community-sourced balance threads, as well as various content creators. Okay, let's see here. Well, they say multiplayer battles, but the first change is a change to campaign. Several changes to Nakai's innate attributes and army effects in campaign. Vanguard deploy, Woodsman terror. It's been a long time since I've played Nakai. Are they saying that Nakai is going to lose some of the effects it gives his army, or are they saying they're going to be giving more effects to Nakai's army? Because if he doesn't have Vanguard deploy or terror for his whole army, I would assume he's not going to have terror for his whole army. That would be insanely overpowered. Vanguard deploy even for your whole army is crazy. Because one of the major reasons to play Beastmen is that the majority of their units have Vanguard deploy. And part of the reason to play Vlad von Karstein over the other Vampire Count Legendary Lords is that his entire army has Vanguard deploy. Vanguard deploy for the whole army is crazy because of just how much capability it offers for a rush playstyle to just get right in and ignore the enemy's artillery and most of their missiles and just rush them right from the start. Or the ability to start off already in a prime position for pincer maneuvers and flanking. So if Nakai gets access to that, and he didn't have it before, which I don't remember him having it before, but like I said, Nakai was one of the first... Nakai wasn't the first Immortal Empires campaign I beat, but I think he was the second. I believe I beat Archaon's campaign first and then Nakai's, because Nakai in Warhammer 2 was really bad and not a very fun experience. Warhammer 3 Nakai is a very fun experience. He's a lot of fun to play. You can just take loads of the southern swaths of Cathay and then swoop up to take the Chaos Wastes, while also Miao Ying and Zhao Ming will just pay you money to do it, because you're killing their enemies, so you get to have the best of both worlds, taking territory and getting paid to do it. So that's cool. So I had a good time with the guy, but I don't recall him being able to put Vanguard deploy on his entire army, because that'd be really crazy, especially with the fact that lizardmen are not the fastest moving army in the game. They're certainly not dwarfs. Dwarfs are by far the slowest. But lizardmen are fairly slow as an army. So that's a big enhancement to lizardmen rush armies if they get Vanguard deploy. Anyways, that's a lot to talk about on just one point. Small rework to the Black Coach's abilities. They now intensify based on how many nearby enemies have been killed. Is that not already how they work? My memory was that the Black Coach's abilities... Yeah, the Black Coach has 3 abilities that will have a order going up that proc from ability to ability to ability, depending on the amount of kills. Was that not how it always worked? Nearby enemies have been killed. Well, that could be important. It might now be that Black Coaches don't necessarily get enhanced by the kills they make, but any enemy death that dies near them. In which case, when the Black Coach is at no low kill number, then the new strategy would be have it sit behind a unit of skeletons or Blood Knights, probably Blood Knights because they'll get more kills. Let the Blood Knights get a ton of kills, the Black Coach will absorb those kills, and the Black Coach will proc its first ability or two, it'll get its Fizz Resist or whatever it does. And from there you go nuts with the Black Coach and start racking up the kills as the super chariot that it's meant to be. Interesting. Additional effects for the spell Glean Magic. Provides spell mastery on self and silence for the enemy. Glean Magic is the Tzeentch spell that allows you to steal Winds of Magic from the enemy casters, right? That's my memory. So, that was kind of an odd spell. I appreciated it and how it fits for Tzeentch. But it was one... It was odd to see a spell that was more or less just get more magic. It didn't feel very subtle. At least comparative to the Dark Elves, the lore of dark magic, where there's a bit more subtlety to generate Winds of Magic by harming your casters. Tzeentch just being able to steal magic from the other side, did feel really odd. So I appreciate that now what it does is also, it enhances the spellcasting of the guy that does the magic thieving, and also provides silence on the enemy so that you can stop enemy casters from casting. That's definitely very big for multiplayer. For single player, I don't know. There's definitely some casters that the AI has a decent understanding of how to use. Skaven casters, it's notoriously a nightmare to fight against AI-controlled Skaven because their Warp Lightning skills are incredible. Similarly, it's always nice to cut off the magic on the vampire counts just because they throw around so much healing on their units. But comparatively, when I'm going against pretty well any race that isn't Skaven or vampire counts, I usually tend not to notice the AI using magic unless I really screwed up my unit placement and the AI gets a really good vortex spell off. But usually the AI louses up vortex spells and the like, and just hits their own units or hits nothing. Skull Cannon and Blood Shrine are getting buffed. They were kind of the oddball units of the Khorne roster that you just didn't find yourself using very often, especially the Blood Shrine. It's neat to, like, Khorne generally has a issue with his army design, in that virtually every Khorne unit is going to boil down to angry unit that kills stuff. And the things that will vary are, okay, how fast does the unit move? How defensively viable is it? But generally speaking, Khorne is all about just loads and loads of melee units. And they can't really give Khorne ranged units, other than the Skull Cannon and the currently existing Marauder Horseman, because it doesn't fit Khorne's general themes. But the Blood Shrine is an interesting attempt at adding a Khorne unit that doesn't just get in there and kill stuff. It provides buffs. So I appreciate that they are making it better so that there's more legitimacy to using that unit rather than just using it for fun. So that you can mix up your Khorne armies and you're not just using the same playstyle every time. I'm probably being a bit overly harsh, because you can go for, like, cavalry-themed Khorne armies, infantry-themed Khorne armies, monster-themed Khorne armies, and there's a fair bit of difference there. Oh, excuse me. Wildwood Ranger's ability is getting reworked. Yeah, the Wildwood Ranger's ability, I think it is that they get bonus versus large as long as they're in a forest, which is neat thematically, and strategically, tactically, it makes sense. You already want to pull monsters into forests if you can. Unless it's Beastmen monsters because they don't care, or Wood Elf monsters because they actually get stronger in forests. But otherwise, you want to pull monsters into forests if you can, because monsters take debuffs from being in forests. And you slap on that ability, and that really makes Wildwood Rangers pretty good monster killers in the woods. But it was very situational, and it did tie into a general issue that the Wood Elves can hypothetically have, though generally speaking, it won't be an issue in the campaign. And battle maps is different. In multiplayer battles, I assume it's a very different story. But the Wood Elves having so many abilities that are tied to being in forest gets really awkward if you're on a desert map or a Badlands map, or like a really intense tundra map that doesn't have, well, a really intense like snowy map up in Norska that doesn't have much forest, because you're going to have very little forest territory that you can use to use your ability. And like I said, in campaign, that's not really an issue because you're going to spend your early campaign fighting in a lot of forested regions as Wood Elves. You're not going to be fighting in the desert or Norska until you get to the mid to late campaign, at which point you're going to have the army setup that you want, generally. Kislev is getting nerfed. Gentle multiplayer cost increases and a reduction to Warsled's collision power. I haven't noticed Kislev being particularly strong, but I've not really touched Kislev in the last few updates. Demonic Locust abilities have been increased to 55-meter range to work better on ultra unit size. That's cool. Reworked how the Arc of Sotek deals its damage. I assume it's still the space laser, right? Because otherwise it... I mean, of course it's still going to be the space laser. What am I saying? Otherwise it wouldn't be the Arc of Sotek. But I assume they're going to change how the laser deals damage. It's ambiguous. More leadership for ghost units. Ghost units have been kind of iffy since they got nerfed. And more large units feature collision attacks. The Tomb Scorpion, the Kadai Destroyer, the Toad Dragon. The Kadai Destroyer didn't have collision attacks, and neither the Toad Dragon. Weird. That is a surprise. It's interesting, though, to see that more monsters are going to be getting collision attacks. That's one thing that's always interested me, is when there are monsters that you can use as kind of odd, slow chariots. They just do a lot of damage on the charge, and then you pull them through, and they do even more damage with the collisions from pulling through the unit, and then rear charge again. I appreciate the monsters that have more uses than just simply throw it into a crowd of enemies and just let it rock. Though that's also certainly quite nice for the monsters that can do that, like the Cambrian War Sphinx, is that its name? I always find that such an odd name. It has to be differentiated from the Necro Sphinx, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the Cambrian War Sphinx. Oh, sorry, my nose is itching. And the Chariot of the Gods is getting buffed. Alright, I have not played Cetra really since Tomb Kings launched in Warhammer 2, so I haven't noticed whether or not the Chariot of the Gods is really that strong. And continuing the trend of the orcs, the greenskins getting new units. Interesting that they call them orcs and goblins instead of greenskins. That was what they were called on the tabletop, but nonetheless, that's surprising, because I don't recall if they've ever dropped that before. The terminology of calling them greenskins. My memory is that pretty consistently over the Total War Warhammer games' lifetimes, they've been consistently referred to as greenskins and not orcs and goblins like they were on the tabletop. It means nothing, of course. It's just a little bit of odd terminology, but still, kind of find that odd. But yeah, the same way that we got orc spearmen and goblin swordsmen in the last update, we are now going to be getting Graveguard halberdiers. This was the one thing I was spoiled about. But it's not a big spoiler. It's neat that the, well, actually, let's read what Creative Assembly has to say before I talk. They like adding new small additions and unit weapon variants. Better anti-large, much more reasonable price than Blood Knights. Yeah. So yeah, it's a simple little balance change, but one that makes sense, because the vampire counts have had pretty odd anti-large. Blood Knights are anti-large, if memory serves. Black Knights aren't. Black Knights are anti-infantry once they put on lances and barding, right? Which is odd, because when you look at Bretonia, their lance-based units are anti-large and not anti-infantry. Though Bretonian Knights realistically can be thrown at anything so long as you use them right. But nonetheless, yeah, it's neat to see vampire counts get some some little balance changes like this that make them a more well-rounded army in some senses. You don't want them to be entirely well-rounded. you don't want anybody but like the Empire and Cathay to be, even Cathay. You don't really want anyone but the Empire to be well-rounded, because it's better for the gameplay, the factions to be diverse, some to be more specialized, some to be less specialized. But it was something that stuck out that the Vampire Counts had really odd lack of armor-piercing anti-large, and that's now covered. So that's a good change. It was not a super big blog, though Lord knows I've taken long enough to talk about it. But generally speaking, I think this all sounds like good stuff, though definitely was a few mild issues here and there. Like I said, these new items, these new ancillaries with drawbacks perhaps aren't going to see that much use from players that are trying to play super pro and take it super seriously. Or not take it super seriously, that makes it sound like it's a bad... I don't believe in using Sweat Lord as an insult and yada yada yada, but people that are trying to play as optimally as possible are going to avoid items like this. But it is cool for people who aren't trying to play optimally, like myself. But broadly speaking, I think this looks like generally all good changes. The balance stuff is going to have to, of course, see until we get to grips with it, we actually get our hands on it. But everything here sounds good. Now, I assume this blog means that we're not going to be hearing from, though I'm sure that I could be wrong, maybe Crave Assembly's community managers posted on Reddit saying, hey, we'll be talking more next week. But there's every possibility in the world that this blog is going to somewhat cover for another period of silence from Crave Assembly. I would not be super shocked. I want to say that they said this DLC was going to release in 2024. I would not be super shocked if it drops like right before Christmas. It's clear there's been a lot more work going into the updates since Shadows of Change was so controversial. Crave Assembly has clearly been more concerned with the potential backlash against the updates and DLCs since then. Further, I think it is inevitable to ask at some point, when is Crave Assembly going to really change focus to the next Total War fantasy game that will presumably not be Warhammer, because you can't make a Total War Warhammer 4. There's just not any space left on the map that can reasonably be done. But whether it's Total War Star Wars, which I still don't really believe in that leak, but it would be kind of cool, not gonna lie. It is inevitable that Warhammer 3 has to... I don't think Warhammer 3 is going to end support soon. I think at the very least we're getting another year. I think 2 or 3 years is not out of the question. Odds are we're going to get Dogs of War. That's already leaked as being part of the files. And I think we're going to be seeing one more Lord pack at the very least as well. I forget, maybe they already in the past dev blogs talked about how many Lord packs they have planned. But I think it's pretty inevitable that we're going to get one more Lord pack at the very least. It will probably be Vampire Counts, Norska, Slaanesh. And that's the one I'm excited for. I'm glad we're getting this Lord pack. I do think that all 3 of the factions that are in this Lord pack are going to benefit from it a lot. I do think that the Ogre Kingdoms needed some touching up to a lot of their mechanics. I don't think there was an bad of it. There are a lot of people who said that... There are a lot of people who believe that Ogres, in the state they're in the game right now, without this upcoming update, there are a lot of people who are of the opinion that the Ogre Kingdoms in its current state are one of the worst races in the game, that they're worse than Vampire Counts and Norska. I disagree, very much so. But I do think they needed some touching up. Greenskins are in a state where, balance-wise, they're not a super hard race to play. It's part of my issue with them. But I personally am of the opinion that Greenskins very much needed an update to give them some more depth to their campaign. As it is now, I've said before in several videos past, that I don't like the wall mechanic as it exists currently. It's kind of just a win and then win more for winning mechanic. And Total War already has a lot of that very snowball-heavy mechanics. And I'm not super opposed to snowballing. Some people are of the view that that there should be really, really strong anti-snowballing mechanics. I'm not. Conversely, I think that when you have a mechanic that is so snowball-heavy as the wall mechanic, it's just boring. So I'm glad to see the Greenskins are getting updates. Khorne, I think, was already in a good place, but I understand wanting to add more units and more legendary lords, particularly because Skarbrand by himself is not super interesting. Skarbrand's cool, but Khorne really feels like there could be another legendary lord who handles Khorne's mechanics as a race in a very different way. And I'm excited to see Skullbringer, Skulltaker. He's Skullbringer, isn't he? No, he's Skulltaker. Khorne, always very creative with his naming conventions. I'm excited to see what Skulltaker brings to the table. Because the law of the lore that's around Skulltaker pushes him more in the direction of being representative of Khorne being the chaos god of not just bloodshed and violence and blowing things up. Well, not blowing things up so much. I guess that's really more Tzeentch to blow things up. But taking heads, shedding blood, killing people, being a maniac is Khorne's domain. But honor is also part of Khorne's domain. And Skulltaker, a lot of the lore surrounding him, pushes him more in that direction of being honorable. Whether or not Crevice Assembly actually plays on that and gives a playstyle that encourages Skulltaker to behave in honorable ways, that's a different question, because they could just make him a blood maniac. Crevice Assembly has, in the past, ignored the lore of characters when they're adding them to the game in favor of what they thought were more interesting. They don't do it very often. Not very often at all, thank God. 99% of the time, Crevice Assembly is very, very faithful to the lore. But every now and then you get a Throg the Troll King situation, where you have this guy who is very interesting in the lore, and Crevice Assembly decided that anyone who was not up on the lore would be confused by the way Throg behaves, so they retconned him to be really stupid. But, putting that all aside, to get back to my original point, realistically speaking, I think we're bound to see one more Lord pack, Norska, Vampire Count, Slaanesh, because Norska and Vampire Counts both need it. They need the love. Slaanesh, I think a few touching ups is really all Slaanesh needs. Excuse me. Not sure why I'm getting so much indigestion. I've just had a couple chocolate pretzels and that's it. But Norska and Vampire Counts are both... Norska has a lot going on. When Warhammer 1 was out and it was the only Total War Warhammer game, Norska was the most advanced and the deepest race in the game. And it's indicative of just how far Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 3 have carried the games forward, that Norska is now left in the dust and considered one of the least interesting races. And one of the weakest. So, I'm excited for that. Vampire Counts are in the saddest state of any of the races, I would say. Which again is crazy, because when Warhammer 1 released, Dwarfs and Vampire Counts were generally considered the best races and the most interesting. And when Warhammer 2 released, because of the state that the Vampire Counts were considered to be in Warhammer 1, when Warhammer 2 came around, the Vampire Counts got one of the first retroactive, overhaul updates that Warhammer 2 was offering with the Bloodlines mechanic. And now that's really not that impressive. So they really need it, because the Bloodlines mechanic is not interesting, and other than that, they have pretty well nothing, because Blood Kisses just exists to propagate the Bloodline mechanic, and other than that, their draw is the Corruption system and Raise Dead, both of which are also available to the Vampire Coast, who are in many ways a more interesting race. So, that Lord pack I'm excited for. And we're going to inevitably get Dogs of War. I'm generally less excited for it, depending on how they implement it. Odds are they're going to implement the Dogs of War as the final new race for the game. And understandably so. I understand why Crevice Assembly would do that. Because Cathay is as far as Crevice Assembly is going to get, where they can be able to push the boundaries of the lore and expand beyond what Games Workshop intended. And it's quite clear with the way the old world has been going for the tabletop. The Games Workshop was curious for a minute about expanding the boundaries of the Warhammer Fantasy world, and then very quickly realized they actually don't want to. Whether for budgetary reasons, or just simply because they prefer to keep it a mystery, or just simply because they don't think that they could make the rest of the world interesting. For whatever reason, Games Workshop has suddenly stopped caring about Cathay and Kislev and gone back to just simply a smaller version of the Warhammer Fantasy tabletop as it was back in the day, before the end times. and Crib Assembly can't really push the boundaries any further. And this was said ahead of time during the build up to Warhammer 3. During interviews, they were saying Cathay is as far as we can push it. Cathay is already a massive victory for expanding the Warhammer world. They're just not going to be able to do Nippon or Ind or the Amazons or what have you. And fair enough. And that really only leaves the Dogs of War, who are the last tabletop race that have not been implemented in the game, largely because they're handled in such a weird way. And as a result, it will likely be, they'll be, here's a DLC, here's 3 legendary lords, Borjo the Besieger, Lucrezia Belladonna, and whoever else is number 3. Maybe Colombo, even though he's supposed to have been dead for 1,000 years. And it'll be this weird smattering of units from various races that Crave Assembly can't reasonably do. There'll be a halfling unit or 2. There'll be an Albion Giants. There'll be Arabian Horsemen. Or Arabian Horsemen. I'm not sure how you're supposed to pronounce it. Just don't call it Araby, because then it's really obvious that they just took the name of the real world country of Arabia and cut the A off and called it a day. Good old Games Workshop creativity there. Odds are that's going to be what it is, and they'll be slapped into the Southern Realms. And I think I've said this in past videos. I'm not super excited for that, because odds are they'll be covering up Cataf Southern Realms. And I think Cataf Southern Realms is a fantastic mod that it has a lot of depth. Even though there are not that many seeming gameplay mechanics to the Southern Realms, they're not big flashy buttons that do cool things or drop nukes. There's a lot of depth to the Southern Realms when you actually play the mod. I can remember when I was first a new player to Total War Warhammer and I was going through the mods, I picked up the Southern Realms mod because it looked really cool, but I wasn't particularly impressed as a newbie because it just looked like Empire units and just slightly different Empire. And it wasn't until a couple of years down the line that I actually dug in and played a Southern Realms campaign as Astalia, and I adored it. I had a fantastic time, a very unique campaign experience, because they actually build tall instead of wide, and a whole bunch of other things I won't even get into because this video is going on long enough. And I really prefer that Crave Assembly not step on that mod's toes. And I know this is going to be insane, I know this is going to sound insane to a lot of people. If you're watching this video, one of the, 10 people who gets this far especially, if you're watching this video, then you're probably thinking, why would mods ever be a higher priority for you than the game itself? There are a lot of people who don't play with mods at all, or they'll only play with 2 mods, and it will be collect defeated legendary lords and better battle camera. Fair enough, those both make sense as baseline mods to use, but there are a lot of people for whom mods are fundamentally illegitimate, and as a result, they have no interest in them. That's not me. The modding community is a big part of what I love about Total War Warhammer, as one could probably guess by the fact that I've helped with a mod. And I think, honestly speaking, that modders at some times are perhaps... I'm trying to phrase this diplomatically, because I do think very highly of Crave Assembly. I think higher of them than most Total War players do. But at the same time, I do think that Cataf and a few other modders have a better grasp on balance and how to make gameplay deep without necessarily being flashy and over the top than Crave Assembly does. So I don't like to see those efforts kind of get, I won't say spit on, because I don't think Crave Assembly is trying to insult anybody when they implement content like this. But I don't want to see the mod rendered to any degree of obsolescence. And if you think my priorities are out of whack, then fair enough. But that's where my priorities lie. Realistically, other than that, it occurs to me now, have I gone a single one of these blog videos without addressing where I think the future road goes for Total War Warhammer? I suppose it's the inevitable topic with Warhammer 3, because once it comes out, it's, very big and very exciting. Oh, we got the demons, we got Kislev, we got Cathay, we got ogres, we got Chaos Dwarfs. It's all very cool. This is all stuff we wanted in Warhammer 2, but it was also the inevitable kind of bittersweet feeling of the end of the road is in sight. And this is a 8-year journey now. 7 years for me, 8 years for a lot of people. So there is the question of where exactly is the end of the road. And also the question is inevitably, where do we go afterwards? Because there are a lot of people that play Total War Warhammer that are not fans of the Warhammer Fantasy license. But they play Total War Warhammer because there's really no other game like it for the fantasy setting. I mean, the broad fantasy setting. Fantasy is a genre. There is no Total War Lord of the Rings. There is no Total War Game of Thrones. There is no Total War Elder Scrolls or Total War Dungeons and Dragons. There is just simply Total War Warhammer Fantasy. And I think that there are quite a few people who, reasonably enough, have had their fun with Total War Warhammer Fantasy, and they're ready for Crave Assembly to move on to a bigger license. And I'll say, for my part, I'm fine with Crave Assembly moving on. I already said I love the mod community. I'm kind of excited for the possibility of them getting the mod community not having to worry about official updates messing with their mods anymore. So, I'm not sure if there's really an end point here to what I'm saying. It's just very rambly. An hour-long video talking about a blog that's like 2 pages long, rambly, inconceivable. But I do think that ultimately Warhammer 3 is in a good place. If it wraps by the end, if Warhammer 3 is officially done by the end of 2025, I was about to say I won't shed any tears. I probably will cry, because it's just going to be nostalgia tears. And this is so sappy, but I don't care. Only weak baby bitch men don't acknowledge that they have emotions. I'm going to be sappy that that I love this game, and it's done, for better and for worse. And that people are going to move on, and I'm just going to be glad to have been here for it. And of course, I think, even though I love Warhammer Fantasy as a license, I love the Warhammer Fantasy universe, I love its lore, and Total War Warhammer gave me this love that I have for Warhammer Fantasy. I am also personally just interested in what's next. Of course, I also don't hate Total War historical games, and there are a lot of people nowadays who hate the historical games and react with sheer vitriol when Total War Pharaoh or the hypothetical Total War Three Kingdoms 2 are brought up. But I am excited to see the future, regardless, I suppose. As long as the future is Crave Assembly still getting to be around and make games, which, I mean, Alien Isolation 2 is also around the corner, so as long as Sega doesn't force Crave Assembly to make another Hyenas, I think we'd all be pretty happy. So on that odd, rambling note that said nothing of real significance, I'll see you later.